So my name is Andrea. I'm your host for tonight. Welcome. We're super excited to have you here on Inspire Advantage's webinar, Mapping Out Your Application Narrative. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded, as Austin just mentioned. What that means is you will receive a recording within a day or two to this webinar. Please feel free to share it with your network. Please feel free to take, additional notes. Add to your notes, whatever you may need. This is your webinar, it'll be yours to keep. In terms of the other question we get often is, how long is this webinar going to be run? Also a fantastic question. We're looking at 45 minutes, a 30-minute conversation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. You'll have the chat available. Please let me know if by chance you don't have it. You have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat, and Austin will get back to you either sort of at the midway point or towards the end. But we want to make sure that we answer as many questions as we can. And this really is your time to be able to speak to an admissions consultant, somebody who knows his stuff. And I'll let him introduce himself momentarily. But what are we talking about tonight? What are we learning? So we'll be learning about what an application narrative actually is, how to determine your application narrative, and how to start developing it, ensuring you're telling a cohesive story and what that looks like, and then additional tips for developing an impactful narrative, followed by that Q&A I just mentioned. Just a little quick overview about who we are. So you may be new to our webinars, or you may have been here before. Again, welcome. We're super excited. We love hosting these. We love being in this space and just providing all that knowledge that you might not be able to get elsewhere. So we're Inspire Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting test prep firm with over 15 years of experience. We specialize in guiding students through the complex and competitive process of applying to graduate schools in healthcare fields, including medicine, residency, dental, veterinary, and physician's assistant, as well as different nursing programs. We have a 94% acceptance rate. We maximize applicants' chances of getting accepted into the country's and the world's most competitive programs. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about us, we do offer free personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. Our admissions counselors, such as Austin here, are always ready and willing to help you through the process. We don't want you to navigate it alone, no matter where you are in your application process. So whether you're just starting out or you're even halfway, we want to be able to support you in any way that we can. And I'll pass it over to Austin to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is the most people I've seen in a webinar live, which is awesome. My name's Austin. I'm first year dermatology resident, which means I'm not doing dermatology right now. Certain specialties don't do that. But I matched at my home institution at Stanford. I went to the Stanford University School of Medicine for med school. Originally from a small town in Colorado, went to the University of Denver, kind of found my way to the big leagues there. And now I have 2 cats and a wife who's a PA. And we're moving back and forth between Utah and California for residency. I'm really excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite and most fearful topics, and that is the application narrative. So this is a big, scary term that I first remember when I was applying to med school so many years ago, because I took a research year too, that it froze me in my tracks. What do you mean a narrative? I've just been doing things, kind of checking off a list, but I got faced with this question by one of my counselors, and it really helped shape where I am now today. It's being true to your story. It's being genuine, and it tells these admissions committees who you are holistically, cohesively as a person. And I think there's more and more emphasis every year on that kind of holistic appraisal of who you are as a person, and that makes the application narrative that much more important. It encompasses everything. It's everything from what you write to what you did, and overall that narrative should be jumping from bit to bit and have little pieces of it to present something that's wrapped up in a nice bow tie for the admissions committee. Now, I kind of gave a preview to why this is important, but it's super, super important when you think about admissions committees and how you get into professional school as a whole. And that is, these committee members are going through dozens, if not more than dozens, to 50 plus, 100 plus, even close to 500, I've sometimes heard, applications, and it becomes a blur to them. So the ones that are going to stand out are those where the picture is painted for them and it's cohesive and it makes sense, and you're not trying to be someone who you aren't, because when you're being the most genuine, you produce the best work. And so it really, really behooves you to pay attention to the application narrative, in that it shows not only what you did, but also what your values are by doing those things that you did. Now, determining one of these is really tough. I so remember like those years ago when I was trying to figure out, who am I as a future doctor? And I'm still trying to figure out who I'm going to be as a future dermatologist. But it all starts somewhere, as does everything. And I think what you need to reflect on first is, how did you get to where you are right now when you're thinking about professional school? Where did you come from? What was your upbringing like? What challenges have you faced along the way? What life-defining formative experiences have you experienced that are unique to you? And then think more objectively with that. What has your performance been to date? What sort of extracurricular background do you have? And I feel like in this case, it's about combining those two such that you present your best self, but you present a genuine, true self in that matter. So thinking about other things that go alongside that and subdividing these is really important, because it's easy to get overwhelmed when you're thinking about all the things that you've done, all the things that you are at a point where you're about to apply to professional school. And so it's good to think about these ideas of the primary application and how you weave together all these elements of the primary application into a narrative. And as you may already know, there are several sections to them, and they're big sections. They require a lot of work. Of course, you know about the personal statement. That's the one that people are the most fearful of. But there's also the work and activities that goes along to supplement your personal statement and explain what you have done and show the admissions committee your commitment to medicine even before you get there. And then, last but not least, you have these letters of evaluation that come from professors, from advisors, from people whom you shadowed, that highlight those qualities that you're talking about from yourself and give you that kind of second opinion that they're looking for to make sure that what you're saying is in fact genuine. Now, the personal statement is 100% both at residency level and at medical school level, PA school level, whatever school you're going to, at the heart of your narrative. This is the thing, this is the why question. Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a pharmacist? Why do you want to be a PA? Why do you want to be a dermatologist? And it requires careful iteration and articulation of ideas that both speak to the admissions committee, but also speak to who you are. And people can get caught up in wanting to just talk about their greatest achievements and why they would be a good fit because they got this score or that score. But what they really want to see is a person fitting in to that specialty, to that medical school, to whatever you're applying to, and showcasing the most important strengths and aspirations and goals that you have in life so that you can envision yourself as a member of that group, that student group, that residency class, whatever it may be. Now, what comes in medical school, not so much at residency level, thankfully, is secondary applications. And these are a slew of essays that you have to write to even get considered, essentially, and you have to pay money to write these, all that kind of stuff logistically. But the key part of it is that's the kind of next tier on the cake of your narrative, is how do you respond to school-specific questions? And you can get a sense of the values of the school by the questions that they ask, the biggest challenge you experienced, a time when you made a mistake, much of those situational judgment questions that come in interviews and things like preview exams and everything like that, they also come in these secondaries. And these are just as important, in my opinion, as, let's say, the work and activities section. They play a big role in the way that you are stacked up against other people, and they are not to be missed. And this is another opportunity to show your unique values, because they often have questions like, tell us about something else that you maybe weren't able to present in the standard primary application. And so that can be another element where you can add to your personal statement and truly be you. Finally, when you get to the most exciting stage, and trust me, it's exciting once you get a few under your belt, it's interviews. It's time to be the person that you said you were on paper. And for some people, this comes more naturally. I can tell you I am a self-proclaimed introvert, even though I'm doing webinars like this. It took a lot of practice. I had a lot of stage fright. But eventually, when you get a few under your belt, this becomes second nature to you. And it's important that when you're practicing this, that you remember you're trying to be who you are. You're not trying to fake it until you make it in this case. Of course, you're trying to do that throughout medical school to become a doctor. But in this case, you want to be the person that you're going to present on that first day of matriculation. And for that reason, it's all the more important to be who you are, to ensure that the fit that you make with the school of your choosing is also one in which they choose you for the person that you are there.
Awesome. Really great conversation so far. I just want to take a quick minute, do a check-in, see how everyone is doing. If there's any questions in the chat, I don't see any questions in the chat. But again, actually, the option may have been turned off. I apologize. Can you guys let me know if you can see the chat? The chat is back on. I apologize. I should have been on earlier. Definitely get those questions in. Gotta love technical difficulties. But yes, definitely get those questions in. As you can see, Austin knows his stuff and will definitely help guide you through the process. And again, I apologize, but the chat is now open for everyone.
Awesome. Okay. Hopefully I'm not overwhelming everyone right now. I'm going to kind of bring it down a notch now that we're getting into the details of things. And we wanted to give you that overview because there's so many elements that come into developing a narrative. And that was more of a big picture overview of what's going to happen in the process logistically. So how do you start? Where is the beginning point? What do you need to think of when developing your narrative? And this is where self-reflection, all the way up to meditation, really, really helps. This is one of those things in which being proactive with your application involves thinking about the ideas that you're going to convey to the admissions committee. You can't say everything in the little space that they provide you. Sometimes people feel like it's a lot of space, but it's really not at the end of the day, because you have to convey who you are both as a person and as a future physician. So this question of what qualities or traits would make me a good doctor is different for everyone. Maybe it's your curiosity. Maybe it's your perseverance. Maybe it's your ability to connect with people. Maybe it's your ability to understand complex concepts and transition that into something that other people can understand. Those ideas are yours and yours alone. Rather than thinking about, oh, I'm a good test taker, I like procedures, and I want to help people. Those are the generic things that everyone should probably think about, even though I'm not like a surgery-bound resident. But in this case, what are those things that are gravitating you towards medicine, and how can you best highlight those? How can your work, your life experiences, your activities demonstrate not only the core competencies of a great physician, that being, of course, empathy and compassion and intellectual rigor and integrity, but what of those coincide with who you are from a value-based perspective? And then finally, most importantly, something you're going to get asked on secondaries, interviews, and probably up until the day you get your last job. What are your strengths and weaknesses? This really allows you to highlight that which you want to highlight, and also develop an idea of how to strengthen that which needs to be strengthened. Now, there is those 15 core competencies that are out there. So I mentioned a few. They break them up in different ways, like scientific inquiry, pretty much like curiosity in the scientific sense, understanding human behavior, that empathetic, curious compassion towards people, and things like critical thinking, these ethical scenarios that are going to be in the gray zone. They base their evaluations, they being admissions committees, on how you perform in all these areas. And this is why you need every element of the application, from the personal statement to the letters of recommendation to the work and activities section, because 15 is a lot. And you're not tasked with explicitly identifying and showing an experience that shows each one of these. It's more so a web, much like the narrative that you start to weave. And it's important to know these competencies. And I actually invite you to look these up just as you're beginning to think about stories and anecdotes that you can use to build your narrative, because it helps guide and frame those principles. And Canada med schools have something very similar. They have like CanMed's rules. Theirs are even more detailed, but definitely look this up. It'll help you prepare for what you're going to be asked about and help you get on the right track when you're just beginning to think about your application. Now, every narrative, every story, whether it's in the movie theater, in the actual play theater, or just being told around the dinner table, has a main theme. Whether that's more apparent or less apparent is totally up to the storyteller and the story itself. But I would say for this case, you want to identify a main theme that is unique, but also approachable. And what I mean by that is, you don't want something that another person can talk about in the grander sense. You want the details that say, if you really do love helping people, what do you mean by helping people? There's so many different ways to help people. You need to drill down into a main theme within that for you. And this is, again, where reflection, that first slide about thinking about your strengths, your weaknesses, what makes you unique, is really important, because then you can weave that into a unique main theme. For me personally, going into dermatology, I knew that like everyone's super smart. Everyone really, really loved to help people. Everyone was good at procedures. For me, I liken dermatology to love for weightlifting. And I wrote a personal statement around that and made kind of a parallel between those two. And I think that was really well received in a unique way to do that. You don't have to do something like that. But for me, it felt true. And again, number 3 right here, organizing your thoughts. First, it's going to come in a shotgun, I would say. It's going to be a web of things that seem not to be connected. But ultimately, you're going to start drawing lines between those and having some sort of annotated bibliography of your thoughts, your experiences, and a main theme will arise from that. And I think this piecing together of your application doesn't have to be done alone. You can have trusted friends, chosen family, loved ones, whoever, to help you out, like define what your theme is going to be that you're going to present to the admissions committee. Now, cohesiveness is just as important as the impact of a narrative. And I think you can do one well and not do the other part so well, and you can still fail in that matter. And fail is a big word. Fail is one in which you're always learning. I use that kind of liberally in this sense, but I would love for you all to learn that the difference between like it has a great theme but doesn't come across that way, and like this person's a really good writer but I don't see the substance. And you want to hit that sweet spot of a cohesive, unique narrative. And this is where the why medicine question comes up. When was the moment that you were inspired to pursue medicine? It may have been gradual, it may have been organic. None of my parents or extended family, anyone in my immediate circle, was in medicine at all. No nurses, pharmacists, doctors, scientists. I found my way from a small town to a small university, and then got a shot to become a doctor at a much larger one. And I think my story has been different from every single step of that. But ultimately, it's allowed me to relate to a large number of people who don't have that health background. And I can explain complex concepts like this. And it also inspired me to be in front of you today, actually, because I didn't have much mentoring growing up. So that was the moment where I wanted to go into medicine, where I was confident saying, I don't know to patients, but we're going to figure this out together. Not having all the answers, but rather the ability to go find those. And like, there's other stories where, for example, I remember I first learned about being a doctor in 7th grade when my dad slapped down a magazine that said one of the top 3 jobs in the US at the time was being an anesthesiologist. And I thought that sounded cool. You probably want to use the former story for your personal statement rather than just being like, oh, that sounds cool. But I think you should weigh all of those experiences in a way that shows your transformation. And I think that goes to that second arrow of these key events that happen. What are those formative experiences that led to that decision? Yes, there is that spark, but what ignited it into a flame? And because not all sparks ignite those fires, but you need sustained oxygen, you need sustained fuel to do that. And I think those are really important key points to think about that will be unique to you. And finally, thinking about those events, you want to contextualize those within the idea of this personal professional growth perspective. What of those events impacted you the most? For me, it was like the anesthesiologist, top 3 job. I was like, I need to learn more about being a doctor. When I got diagnosed with a fever of unknown origin and spent my senior year of high school with like daily temps in the 102s for like 9 months, I wanted to learn how to be a guide like the infectious disease doctor that took me through that. And I think it's important to share not only how you think about each event in your narrative, but also how that it will impact you in the future. So that again is like future projecting while also reflecting. Now, it's important not to shy away from challenges. Everyone has their own. Mine were very medical. I had a very supportive family, thankfully, but we at one point thought I had like some rare disease and ultimately spontaneously resolved. But that was a huge part of why I even applied to med school in the first place, because I want to help people who go through similar feelings of uncertainty and dread in that way. And this kind of bleeds over into the idea of like what a challenge is for people. Some people have what are so-called red flags in their application, and that's okay. No one is perfect, and like perfect is the enemy of great in that sense. So don't shy away from approaching, reflecting on, and attacking this idea of like having a lack of experience in one area, having poor grades, a poor test because you get really stressed in test environments. It's about the way you approach such challenges rather than the challenges and outcomes themselves. And it's important, depending on where you address it, whether it's in the secondary or the personal statement and you build around that, that you present it in a way that you're growing. That's super, super important. Yes, you need to tell the story of what it was, but what did you get out of it? What did you learn from it? And some challenges, you know, there's a lot of pain involved in that way, but in what way did it positively shape you? That's really, really important. It's just like being asked, tell me about a time you had a conflict with someone that was close to you. They're asking, what was that conflict and how did you overcome it? Even though they're not truly asking directly about that. It's the same with these challenges. And that should fit into your narrative. A narrative is cohesive because it flows from the beginning to end. Not necessarily chronologically, but there isn't gaps the admissions committee member will notice, like, they didn't like give this piece of their life, or this test score doesn't really make sense with the rest of their application. What's going on? There's a missing story here. And again, kind of easier said than done here, but like considering the whole application in the grandest sense, in a way that an admissions committee member is going to get handed your packet. How are they going to look at it together? Will they see you as kind of scatterbrained, going to and from activities, one-off things, making a checklist? That's the idea of like a checklist mentality is one in which they can't connect the dots of meaningfulness and longitudinal commitment to things. Or are they going to see someone who logically expanded their curiosity, invested in the activities, the clubs, the extracurriculars, and the work that they did, and did it for specific reasons, which led to new opportunities there. And this is where it's really, really, really important to, again, consider everything that you've done as a whole and what fits into that narrative, and those things that you're going to leave out, because every component there should contribute to who you are as a candidate and provide those 15 core competencies and give you that background that shows you're really well-rounded. And that, again, comes with picking your letter writers too. You want to pick those people who know you from different avenues, not all science professors. They specifically ask you not to do all science professors because they want different perspectives on who you are as a person. Because of course they want someone who can survive medical school, but they also want someone who can become a great doctor. And only through looking at different angles of who you are as a person can they assess that. So you have this primary application, but you obviously have dream schools. I never expected for myself to get into Stanford. It was kind of one of those things where you just apply because you're applying and it worked out. But some people have very specific schools they want to go to because maybe they have friends or family members, or it's close to home. And for that reason, it's really important to consider how your narrative talks to the schools of your dreams, the target schools in that way. And this is where your research on their side of the coin is really important. What are their missions and values? What are the specific programs that makes them stand out? I know for Stanford, they had a couple free clinics, and they had like a dermatology free clinic, and they had all these resources. We could do free skin checks for all the student athletes there. That was really cool for me because I knew dermatology was kind of in my future at that time. But importantly, not only do you identify those things, but in your narrative, how do you speak to fitting within those goals, fitting within those resources, fitting within those mission and values? And you might have a hard time with the mission and values because they're often generic between schools, but there's little tweaks that you'll notice, like some are big research, some are big into community health, some have a little bit of both. And for that reason, your secondaries especially should not only contribute to your own narrative, but provide the narrative that is school specific there. It's all about fit, and the fit goes both ways. So you do your best to present why you would fit there, and they all do their best to find people who fit the best there. Now, these admissions committees likely have not met you in person, and it's really important to try to convey who you are as a live person in a static environment, such as paper/Word document. And in this case, showing and explaining is so important, because I've worked with so many students where they have an amazing story, and I know exactly what they're talking about because we've been working together for hours on end on this. But as an admissions committee member who sees this for the first time, they don't get the true impact of what they're talking about. There's certain details, there's certain language that is missing there, certain figures, statistics, adjectives that really would tell the narrative in more of that story format and catch the admissions committee's eyes. And I think it's really important to not forget that you're going to be meeting someone for the first time, except it's going to be completely asynchronous in that way. So again, depth in that way is important. This is why it's very difficult to do this in such a short amount of time, because you have to tell a story, you have to be cohesive, but you have to give it depth as well. And so that's why it's really important to start early on this stuff. Now, going into the little tips and tricks that we can have for developing this narrative, it's number one important to be genuine. You cannot ride fabrications and lies through med school, through residency and beyond. Not only because it's unethical, but most importantly, you're going to end up in a place that you are not a fit for. And eventually you're going to be found out, and it's going to be really negative. And I think it's the antithesis of what medicine is as a whole. So in this case, you may have gaps in your application and in a narrative that isn't maybe quite complete, but there is always a story to tell. And it is always more important to be honest about that and acknowledge those gaps and show how you're growing to fill those gaps than to prefabricate it and make it seem like, there's something there. And again, you have so much variability in your space. You have your personal statement, you have your secondaries, you have your interviews. You do not want to be redundant, because you have so little time to convince these admissions committees, this is who I am, and this is why I'm a good fit for the next half decade or so at your school. And it's really important, again, to consider your application at a grand scale and make sure that you're not repeating the same stories, that you're not repeating the same values, and therefore wasting that precious space to tell your story. Now, I would say arguably, this title of the slide is the most important out of the entire presentation. This idea of show, don't tell. And this is, again, one of those things where I heard it first and I was like, I don't know what that exactly means. But it becomes more apparent the more that you do this. Everyone can tell a story where it's like a good thing to read, just like a good book, right? But when you build around it a reflection and future project onto it, that is another level. And this is one of those things where you say, of course, what the situation was, but what did you do? They want to know what you did. It may have been involving a huge team of people and you had a really great outcome or a really big challenge that you overcame. But what did you do specifically for that? Show them how you embody the principles of being a doctor. That is the piece that is missed the most often, because you can get on a roll telling your story, but then you forget the part that you have to explain what you did because you were the one who did it. So it's often unnatural feeling. And this is the part where we get stuck the most between students and mentors, but it's the part that matters the most too. And this, again, is about vulnerability and imperfection. I openly shared how I was really sick for 9 months. And like, I didn't get my last year of high school sports in a way that would ever give me an opportunity to play at college. But I was okay with that. I was embracing that imperfection. And ultimately, it probably saved me from a few concussions in football. Nothing against that. But it was one of those things where that's a different fork in your journey, and you should embrace that. Embracing this idea of resilience and perseverance and grittiness is one in which the admissions committee's members always want to hear about, because they probably didn't have an easy way to medicine either. So they're waiting to hear your story and what will allow you to relate to people who are going through the worst times of their life. Now, I've said genuine probably about a dozen times right now, but I keep hammering that in because genuineness often gets lost in cases where you're trying to compete against other amazing, amazing people. And I hate that we have to compete in medicine for these spots. It's a very competitive process, as is everything nowadays. But this is, again, where it's not about showing that you're better than other people. It's about showing who you are, putting your own voice in that, and being honest and confident in who you are. You're of course, selling yourself in a way to admissions committees. But more than that, you are showing who you are as a person, not a product in this sense. There's a huge difference between saying, here's my resume, hire me because I have these great sales year over year. This is like, I have had these experiences. This has influenced who I am as a person, and therefore how I'm going to practice as a doctor there. Now, the hard thing to balance when you're showing a story is to keep your narrative concise. And in that case, this is where people, friends, tutors, mentors come in to help you give that third person view and allow you to nail down the most important words that you're using, the most important sentences, and really figure out how can you make it the most powerful in the shortest amount of time there. It's important to be clear because these admissions committee members are whipping through your applications. You may take hours and hours and days and weeks and weeks to write your application. They will take 5 minutes to get through the whole thing. So you want to make it like you have those hooks in your narrative and you drive it through with your experiences there. And again, a cohesive narrative connects your experiences. So it's really important to identify common themes and approach them from different angles and different stories. Don't be redundant, but show how each activity kind of uniquely contributed to the most important values that will set you apart from other people. Okay.
And now we hop into the Q&A. Austin, that was fantastic. I think I've done a lot of these webinars, and every time I hop in, I feel like there's something else that I learn, even though I'm not going through this process. So I can only imagine how much our audience is learning. We do have a couple of questions. I think we can hop right in there. I think we're good for time. So we are asked, I'd like to know your perspective on what is a good weakness to mention. I've seen a bit of discourse about admissions teams not liking weaknesses that are not true weaknesses or are twisted into strengths.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I think let me combat the second part of that question, this idea of twisting into strengths. There is the notion that in interviews and in secondaries, you don't want to just leave off like, here's my weakness, bye. Like you don't want to do that. You want to show how you're growing from that. I think what you're getting to is correct. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, right? And in a way that helps you get through med school, but also really makes for a lot of burnout. And I can touch on that personally. So there's a key difference between showing growth and twisting something into a strength. And yes, this is not being like, if you're positing a weakness that you just want to flip on them, that can be looked at by people both on paper and in person as like you're trying to dodge the question, versus you want to have a genuine thing that you're working on that is, of course, not a red flag. Like if you're saying, I don't really like people. It's okay if you're not a people person at night and you want to go home and recharge and you're an introvert like me. But saying that in that context is different. Like, okay, maybe a weakness, maybe you don't connect with people that well, but you don't want to really convey it that way. It's not that you don't connect with people well. It's that you have a battery that you're running on. And for me personally, I think it's something that I've been working on since the beginning of college is the act of being present. And I've had challenges with that. I am always future projecting. I'm thinking what the next day is going to bring, the week, the year, the application. And that's given me a lot of success. I've been very proactive, almost to a fault. I've had an email inbox of 0 since the beginning of college. But at the same time, it doesn't allow me to immediately connect with those people around me. Yes, I see them. Yes, I talk with them. Yes, I can be with them and treat them. But sometimes I miss the experience of being with them. And because of that, I really engage in meditation as much as I possibly can with apps like Headspace and that kind of stuff. And this is oftentimes my interview answer to a weakness of mine. So you can see how, like, okay, it is a weakness in this way, and I'm being vulnerable about that, and I'm working on that, and I'm doing so in a way that is quantitative and that is working out. And it's not one of the generic things like I'm perfectionist or I'm a procrastinator or something like that, where you kind of see that twisting into like, oh, if I'm a procrastinator, then I can take on more all at once and it still gets done or something like that. So hopefully that helped.
And please let us know if that helped.
Yes, yeah. Clarifying questions are always good.
So there's another question. What qualities do you think you can show in the personal statement that isn't shown in the rest of the application?
Ooh. So this is actually a great point. I think the personal statement stands out, and maybe some secondaries, depending on what the content of the secondaries are, as the one time you can craft your answer to an otherwise generic question in whatever way you want. For me, I literally started out my personal statement for medical school with the quotes, "I don't know." That is what my infectious disease doctor told me about my disease. And that set the tone for the rest of the personal statement. What I'm getting at here is that you have a more opportunity to be a creative writer and set the stage and set the hook, much more than in things like your work and activities, where you have to be very like, you have to say what you did, how much work you put in, what you got out, what you learned, but in very short, snappy sort of things, besides the most meaningful experiences, which you have a little bit more anecdotal time on. But I think when it comes down to the specific qualities, there's not one in which the personal statement works better than the other ones. It's more so the whole journey and story that you're telling in a personal statement. Oftentimes, you're going to come across pieces of your application where you can only talk about one quality, like leadership, when you were the president of the club or started an EMS foundation at your school or something like that. So you can very much like pointedly highlight things in your application, other elements of your application other than the personal statement like that. But the personal statement should be able to weave a lot of things through. And honestly, I didn't spend as much time thinking about, okay, I have to hit on leadership, scientific inquiry, all that kind of stuff. I wanted to hit on those things that made me want to be a doctor. And that was this idea of resilience. It was this idea of being curious and gritty and wanting to go into a field, not because I was comfortable with having all the answers, but because I was more comfortable with guiding people to get at least what we all know together in a way that's cohesive and whatnot. So it can go different ways in that way. You can highlight whatever quality you want in the personal statement. And I would say, like you asked in your question, like what qualities, plural, because you have so much space in the personal statement. Whereas I feel like secondaries and working experiences and other stuff, there's a lot of those like one-off, you have to be really built around a specific quality rather than like being able to flow from start to finish with them.
Awesome. It doesn't look super helpful information. Thank you. You're very welcome.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like there's any other questions in the chat, but Austin, I just wanted to pick your brain real quickly. Is there anything else that we may not have touched on? And you know what?
Oh,
you know what? I was going to say if there's anything we haven't touched on, but we do have a question. So let's
yes,
get
I
to
see
that
it.
first. If you are inspired to become a doctor due to a family member suffering from a disease, is it helpful?
Yeah, 100%. This is one of those things where I think a lot of people have that experience. It's the way that you tell it that's the most important. For example, I had an applicant whose grandpa got diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease, and he became the primary caretaker because he was that role in the family at the time. He was kind of, the quote unquote man of the house, whatever it was. And he had to kind of take that over because the rest of his family was providing and providing the money to be able to support the rest of the family. So in that way, he became a caretaker, essentially like a CNA without a license and whatnot. And he began to tell those stories about that and how it inspired him to become a doctor, because he didn't want people with similar conditions to be left alone. That's very specific to that disease, that family member, in the context of it. But you have to remember there's tons of people out there who are helping their families with, and many members of them have diseases, whether it's strokes, heart attacks, cancer, whatever it may be. So it's very, very unfortunate. You want to paint it still in the way that what were the specific things that triggered you to become a doctor versus just like help out at the time. And that's really important to reflect on and build on and really highlight to the admissions committee, hey, this happened and this actually sparked something that's going to continue through the rest of my life. So short answer is yes, it is helpful.
Awesome. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any more questions, but again, we'll give them a minute. In the meantime, anything that we may not have touched on that you'd like to add in? Any last minute points, words of encouragement?
Yeah. So always words of encouragement. I'm on the other side now. I was 100% in your shoes. I don't know how many times you've heard this from someone, but it can be done. I know it's really competitive and it gets more competitive year over year. So I can't imagine how stressful it is, but you starting by listening to this webinar is the first step in that journey. My 7th grade math teacher got this quote from somewhere, and I know it wasn't from him, but this once begun, half done methodology is totally true. And be proactive. Please, please, please don't procrastinate on this. I know you get a burst of energy when you have a deadline. I totally get why people procrastinate, and like it allows them to still be effective. But this is one of those things where you have to ruminate and reflect and keep coming back week after week to certain things. So to get the best narrative, you have to start early and ask people questions. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with your friends and family to get a better sense of who you are from that third person perspective.
Wonderful. We're at the 45-minute mark. So I think this is a really great time to wrap it up. Austin, once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. To our audience, we are here to support you in any way that we can. Please don't hesitate to book a free consultation. Get back to us via email, via our website, whatever it takes. We are here to support you along this process.
Good luck, everyone.
Yes, good luck, and we look forward to having you on the next webinar.